Right, welcome back everybody. Let's get into education now and talk to the dropout rate. Now, the Department of Basic Education is anticipating an increase in dropout rates due to extended school closures this year. It made a presentation to Parliament this week and raised concerns over thousands of learners who had as yet not returned to school, especially in KwaZulu-Natal. The department says around 38,000 grade 7s and around about 18,000 matriculants in that province could quit. However, experts say these figures seem vague rather than concrete projections. Let's get a little bit more on this, and to discuss it further, we're joined by Roné McFarlane, who is the co-head of research at Equal Education. Now, we did invite the Department of Basic Education, but unfortunately they didn't come forward and confirm their attendance. But we keep that invitation to them and hope that they will be able to join us at a later date. But Roné, thank you very much for joining us. It's good to have you on the program.
Good morning, Leanne, and thank you for having me.
Let's talk to these predictions. What do you as Equal Education think about them?
Well, the first thing to say is that we know dropout rates are a huge issue in South Africa under normal circumstances. Only about half of learners who enter the education system eventually end up obtaining a Matric certificate. So you have about 50% of learners who don't complete their school career. And we know very little about what happens with those learners who do drop out. Now, experience in other countries has shown us that crises like extended school closures are likely to contribute to increases in dropout rates. So when the department says that it's expecting an increase in dropout rates, that is probably true. However, the extent of that dropout rate is probably still very unclear at this moment. The figures that the department presented to Parliament estimate about 75,000 learners dropping out. But those are only figures for grade 7 and grade 12. They don't speak to the other grades. And they seem to be largely based on attendance rates over the week before 31 August, when the last group of learners returned to school. So we don't know how many of those learners are potentially staying at home because they're still afraid to catch COVID at school or to infect a family member, or who maybe have given up on the school year and plan to return next year. The department also didn't explain how these figures compare to what they usually expect dropout rates to be in a year. So it's not clear whether these figures are additional dropouts.
Yeah.
And we also still don't know what will happen in the rest of the year. We may still see more learners drop out towards the end of the year.
Yeah, so basically right now there's nothing concrete, and this is all on projections, and as the department have even themselves said, this is really just a kind of, I don't know, almost a ballpark figure of getting attendance and saying, this is how many people are at school, these aren't. We don't even know if all schools are actually doing that. It's really a little bit wishy-washy, and only time will tell as to how bad that dropout rate is. But as you say, comparatively to other years, I mean, we've got close on a 50% dropout rate from when students or learners begin until they matriculate, and that is a very, very big problem. So based on your research and your interaction with different stakeholders, how much of an impact will these extended closures have on the academic year? Because there's also still the aspect that, you know, grades go in on certain days, then they don't go, then they're in, then they're out. So it's still a very stop-start kind of scenario for them.
Definitely. And again, what we've learned from crises like, for instance, the Ebola crisis, is that during extended school closures, it's not just that you miss out on that school time when schools are closed. It's also that after such a long break, learners are more likely to have forgotten the work that they did earlier in the year. So you also have to recover some of the work that was covered at the beginning of the year. So to have normal curriculum expectations of learners at the end of the year would be completely unfair, and we have called on the department to be very clear what the expectations would be at the end of the year and to adjust expectations accordingly. That being said, even if learners can't cover the entire curriculum, which there's been quite a lot of focus on, it's still important for learners to be back at school. There are various benefits for learners to be in school and to stay connected to the school community. Learners access psychosocial support at school. As we've said, an extended period of not being connected to the school can contribute to increased dropout rates. Learners can be more vulnerable to abuse if they stay at home for long periods of time. And in other countries, we've seen an increase in teenage pregnancies as a result of extended closures. So there are many important reasons for learners to be back at school and for us to try and create structure for learners without necessarily this rushing towards the end of the year and covering the curriculum, which we know will not be possible.
So, okay, the dropout rate is a major concern. I also want to address, if you're privy to this kind of information, the standard of teaching that is happening currently, because I've read a few reports that are saying that teachers who are under immense pressure to finish the syllabus are rushing through it, and the quality of the education is now at stake. And besides the fact that there is this high dropout, we're not necessarily seeing the amount of learners back in the classroom due to the dropout, but it's also the syllabus that is not being taught in the best way that it probably should be taught. Have you heard this? Do you have feedback from that?
Definitely, we know that the pressure on teachers and on learners during this time is immense. Learners we've spoken to in Gauteng and the Western Cape have said that overcrowding in classrooms is now a huge issue, as well as teachers' shortages. The Department of Basic Education has said that around 20,000 teachers have applied to stay at home because of comorbidities, and it doesn't have a budget to finance replacement teachers. And the initial promise to provide additional classroom space has also not materialized. So you have fewer teachers in schools, and schools are dealing with social distancing challenges by having learners come to school on alternate days or alternate weeks. And so it's definitely not a back to normal. There's still significant disruptions, and definitely a lot of pressure on teachers and learners who have to navigate the curriculum under these conditions.
Matric examinations. Now, we focus obviously a lot on the matrics because this has a ricochet effect on basically every year thereafter and going into universities. So we hear that the department is adamant that they're not going to have a blanket pass rate, that they're going to drop standards of the exams, that they're still going to mark them at that rate. They're not going to push the exams any further than they have already, or the syllabus that they have already. And I think results coming out it's just jumped out of my mind. I don't know if it's middle of Jan or Feb.
In February.
In February, correct. Yeah. And then, of course,
yes,
varsities are worried about that as well. Matrics, let's focus on them for a bit. What is going on there?
You know, one really has to feel sympathy for matric learners and for teachers teaching matric learners who really face a very difficult situation. We know that during this time there has been a big focus on supporting matric learners. Surveys that EE conducted showed that learners in higher grades were most likely, for instance, to have heard from their teachers during lockdown, to have been given worksheets during lockdown. And they also were the first to return to school. And while other learners are attending school on alternate days, matrics are attending school every day. We know that the department has also launched a broadcast lesson program called Matrics to help support matrics prepare for the exam. But one cannot imagine that all of those interventions can really make up for the time that is missed. And even taking into consideration that the exams have been postponed to start later in the year. So it's really, really a difficult situation for Matric. We know that the Department of Education also told Parliament that they've reached an agreement with the higher education sector to start the academic year a bit later in 2021 to accommodate the results coming out later. So the minister is confident that it won't impact admissions to higher education. But really this moment will again highlight the inequality in the education system, because you will have matrics who studied throughout lockdown who are probably more prepared for the matric exam because they didn't have a bunch of other distractions.
Absolutely.
And then you will have matrics who had absolutely no support during lockdown, who are completely unprepared for that exam.
You took the words right out of my mouth. That's just, I have a big note here with exclamation marks on it saying inequality is just, that gap is going to grow even bigger. I mean, we were already one of the, if not the most unequal society in the world, and this is going to just widen that gap even further, which I'm not sure how we catch it up again. Roné, we got to let you go, but I'm hoping we invite you back again, because this is a big conversation we need to keep having. The one worrying aspect I haven't spoken to you about is the fact that, and I know that you actually quoted or were quoted from some studies and research that you've been doing with unions, with everybody, and basic education in certain schools, saying that 30% of schools that you have spoken to have revealed that they've actually lost complete contact with certain learners, that have not come back, they are nowhere to be found. Now that is very worrying, and that I imagine is only, I think you're only saying in a few schools, but I imagine this picture is a very bad one nationwide. Do you know if the department are following up on these schools or these learners that have disappeared out the system?
It's definitely very concerning. It's the stat is from a survey that all the major unions, teacher unions in the country conducted. And relates to about 5,000 schools. And it's definitely incredibly worrying. We don't know exactly what the department is doing to address that. They have said that provincial education departments are encouraging schools to reach out to learners who have not returned to school, and to encourage them to come back or to apply for formal exemption until the end of the year if they're not planning to come back. But what they are doing with learners who they have lost complete contact with, they have not provided any clarity on that.
All right, we leave it there for this morning. Thank you very, very much. A very worrying conversation that we're having here about learners and returning to school, dropout rates, the standards of exams and the syllabus teaching, and even more importantly are those learners that have just completely dropped out of the system, and there's actually just no trace of them because they can't be found. They just have not reported back for school, and nobody knows where they are at this point. Roné McFarlane is the co-head of research at Equal Education. All right, Sakina, sure, not enough.